In episode 1 of this series, we witnessed the dramatic increase in life, known as the Cambrian explosion, which took place from 540 million years ago to 500 million years ago. Carbon dioxide levels during this time increased from approximately 3,000 parts per million to 3,800 parts per million. Episode 2 will cover the 40 million years that followed the Cambrian explosion, and we will further examine the very complex relationship that exists between the climate and evolution. It can be best viewed as a type of neural network where cause and effect are not straightforward. The network consists of numerous nodes or phenomena, such as carbon dioxide levels, tectonic plate activity, global temperatures, marine life population, sea levels, and many more. Understanding how these are connected, and indeed if they are connected, is incredibly difficult. As an example, what is the causal connection between the amount of nutrients on the sea floor and the levels of carbon dioxide? You could be forgiven for saying there is no connection, but the events of the next 40 million years, from 500 to 460 million years ago, will demonstrate a clear connection. We will now examine this period and in so doing uncover many aspects of the interrelationships that exist between carbon dioxide, climate change, and human evolution. The analysis is broken down into 2 phases. Phase 1 will cover the changes that took place over the 15 million years following the Cambrian explosion, and that created an environment that enabled life to thrive and evolve even further. We will identify significant nodes in the causal network. The first being the atmospheric content level of carbon dioxide. 500 million years ago, the carbon dioxide level stood at approximately 3,800 parts per million. Over the previous 40 million years, a trend had been maintained where the supply of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere exceeded the demand for carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This model displays the inevitable result, which was a steady increase in carbon dioxide levels. However, over the next 15 million years, another node of the ecological network would reverse this trend. The aquatic food web is a fundamental component of climate change and evolution. Its impacts are often underestimated and/or underreported. As an example of its importance, in present times, the aquatic food web supplies around 50% of the total oxygen in the atmosphere. At the entrance to the food web lies the single-celled marine phytoplankton. They are plants and are often described as the grass of the sea. They float around in the oceans, mostly close to the surface. Phytoplankton take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and use the sun's energy through photosynthesis to produce glucose and oxygen. The increased carbon dioxide levels that had become available for feeding over the past 40 million years had driven what has been called a phytoplankton explosion throughout the oceans. As the phytoplankton population expanded, so did the population of zooplankton. Zooplankton are animals and they devour phytoplankton. Thus, the increase in phytoplankton led directly to to an increase in zooplankton numbers. Jellyfish are types of zooplankton. Unlike other filter feeders, their population numbers and their evolution were stimulated by the increased abundance of the phytoplankton-rich food source. Both planktons produce particles as they die, molt, or excrete. These particles contain organic material that sinks to the sea floor. Increased organic material at lower levels of the oceans then encourage zooplankton to migrate to deeper levels and hence further spread their area of habitat. Also, increased organic material fall into the sea floor would have caused the organisms living on the sea floor to benefit and swell their numbers. There was an abundant variety of invertebrates, such as sea worms, occupying the sea floor, as well as bacterial life. Larger seafloor dwellers, such as trilobites, were both filter feeders and predators of seafloor invertebrates. The increase in organic material and seafloor invertebrates produced, therefore, a spurt in the population of trilobites. Another node of the network now makes its mark: the Earth's tectonic plates. The movement of the tectonic plates over millions of years produced a multitude of phenomena. Tectonic plate movement caused ocean ridges and deep ocean trenches to form. This created new environments to which life could migrate and effectively expanded the area of the sea floor. Massive land collisions stimulated volcanic activity both on land and on the ocean floors. The ocean waters and the sea floor were, as a result, further enriched by the delivery of large amounts of inorganic nutrient to the oceans through volcanic activity. The movement of the tectonic plates also contributed to a rise in sea levels, which were at least 100 meters above the modern level. At the same time as the continents separated, the sea floor was spreading, and new areas of habitation were being created by the increase in the extent of tropical shelf areas. Although the long-term trend for the extent of tropical shelf areas has been to decrease, during this period the trend was bucked. Life soon spread to these shelf areas, which were especially suited to the development of coral reefs. A simplified status of the ecological causal network at the end of this period, 485 million years ago, could be summarized as follows. Both the volume and types of locations in which marine life could live expanded substantially, and the population numbers of living organisms increased proportionately. So much so that the consumption of carbon dioxide by the aquatic food web began to exceed the supply of carbon dioxide being produced. Other factors will have been involved, but this led to a gradual reduction in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, although there was still an overall surplus. Throughout this period, global temperatures had remained warm and roughly stable. So, leading into the next phase of study, There were these causes input to the ecological network: an increased population, an increased volume and number of habitable areas, an ample supply of carbon dioxide, and a stable and warm temperature. What was the effect of these causes? The net effect was the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, or GOBE for short. Phase 2 describes the remarkable set of events that took place over the next 25 million years. That it took only, relatively speaking, 25 million years is quite surprising, as it is considered one of the two most significant evolutionary events in the history of Paleozoic marine life, the other being the Cambrian explosion. But while these two phenomena occurred close together in geological time, the characteristics of the GOBE and the Cambrian were quite distinct. The distinction is best explained by elaborating on the various types of marine life that evolved over the two periods. The first animals to evolve were related to sponges and developed around 635 million years ago. A sponge is barely recognizable as an animal. It does not have organs or true tissue. But during the Cambrian explosion, starting around 540 million years ago, evolution took a gigantic step. Animals evolved that had body plans we would recognize today as animals. They range from quite simple to complex. A simple body plan is demonstrated by the jellyfish. This has a plan that is arranged in a symmetrical fashion around a central point. The majority of the more complex body plans to evolve were bilaterians. Like this agnathan fossil, they possess approximately mirror image halves. They have a front and a back. And, unlike the earlier sponges, they also have specialized cells organized into tissues and organs, such as muscles, nerves, and the gills, shown here. The agnathan also possessed the further refinement of a backbone. These general body plans all developed during the Cambrian explosion over a period of 40 million years. The essential feature that differentiated the GOBE during its 25 million year period was not evolution of more general body plans, but the diversification into more specialized subtypes, so that diversity tripled. But what exactly does that mean? To better understand, it is useful to have a handle on how life is classified, and on these key terms. Taxonomists are continuing to refine the basic classification, but the essential breakdown looks like this. At the top of the hierarchy sits the domains and kingdoms. All of cellular life is broken down into two domains. The two domains are further broken down into kingdoms. We are part of the animal kingdom. Domains and kingdoms are wide-ranging and generic, but as we work our way down the hierarchy, each layer gets more specific. Taking the kingdom of animal as an example, it consists of many different types of animals. One such type is that of chordata, of which the agnatha vertebrate is a member. One class of chordata is the set of mammals. One order of mammals is the set of primates. Then we continue through hominids and Homo, until we come to us, the species Homo sapiens. The bottommost rank of species is the most fundamental and exclusive. Among living animals, a species is generally regarded as a group of closely related individuals that can interbreed and successfully produce fertile offspring. The diversity and specialization of the rank of species is best appreciated when we consider that the number of species estimated to exist currently is around 9 million. So returning to the GOBE, that which distinguished this event was the increase in diversity across the bottom 4 layers of life's hierarchy. But what caused this to occur? When we look at the major features of the underlying causal network, they are not too different from those prevailing at the time of the Cambrian explosion. Apart from one feature, the increased volume and number of habitable areas. As noted earlier, the Ordovician period produced a wide dispersal of the continents and was also a time of rapid seaflow spreading. It has been observed that geological intervals where the continents are combined into supercontinents tends to correlate with lower marine diversity, while periods with widely separated continents and large numbers of microcontinents can be related to intervals of higher diversity. These latter conditions precisely describe the GOBE. Whereas before populations were, relatively speaking, quite close together, the expanding habitable areas allowed discrete populations to live in discrete areas, and thus to evolve in quite different ways to those originally similar populations occupying other distant locations. This is much more than a theory, and there are modern examples of this effect, including that of the Galapagos Islands, made famous by Charles Darwin. The island of Madagascar is also a stunning example of this evolutionary trait. Madagascar lies off the coast of Africa. The island is a fragment of the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana. It became separated from what is now Africa about 165 million years ago. It eventually separated completely from what became India about 90 million years ago. It thus became an isolated habitat, and this very isolation resulted in the evolution of a wide diversity of animals and plants. It contains about 5% of all the plant and animal land species in the world, and more than 80% of them are found nowhere else. 6 out of 8 species of Baobab tree are unique to Madagascar. 2/3 of the world's species of chameleons are native to Madagascar, while lemurs only exist on Madagascar and small nearby islands. This diversity and uniqueness came about because of Madagascar's isolation. And for 25 million years, much of marine life benefited from similar circumstances, and it diversified accordingly. But the proliferation and diversification eventually produced a change to both the climate and evolution. The major nodes of the causal network were changing. Throughout this period, the movement of the tectonic plates had produced sustained volcanic activity. This had pumped large volumes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But Offsetting this increase in the supply of carbon dioxide, a dramatic increase in demand occurred through the increased marine population. Filter feeders now dominated the oceans. Their food was phytoplankton, which had experienced a surge in its numbers. And the essential food of phytoplankton is carbon dioxide. Thus, the aquatic food chain caused the demand for carbon dioxide to gradually outstrip its supply. A newcomer placed even greater pressure on carbon dioxide reserves. Green algae spread from the sea onto rocks and eventually evolved to be able to survive on the land alone. These land plants depended on carbon dioxide for survival. This conceptual diagram shows that due to the increased demand from 500 million years ago to 460 million years ago, carbon dioxide levels fell by over 50%. And while global temperature had previously remained stable, it had dropped by around 9 degrees Fahrenheit during the GOBE. So at the end of the period, the causal network looked like this. An increased population and diversity of marine organisms. Plants were spread into the land. Carbon dioxide levels were falling. So too was the global temperature. We will discover the effects of these causal nodes in the next episode of this series.